Let's talk about the past for a moment. You know, those moments we so desperately try to forget, or at times the memories we can't seem to shake off. But here's the thing about the past. It's not a prison, it's a mirror. The past. It's like an old photograph, yellowing at the edges, dusty from years of being shoved in a drawer. It's both familiar and haunting. Sometimes it comes up when you least expect it, tugging at your mind, and in the blink of an eye, you're back there. Back to the moments when you thought you had it all figured out, and then the rug was pulled out from under you. I remember so many of those moments. Let me take you back. Not too far, but far enough. A few years ago, I was standing in the middle of my life, in a place where everything felt like it was going wrong. I was stuck in the kind of rut that I didn't know how to get out of, but I also didn't know how to change. I had a job that felt more like a burden than a passion. Relationships that were more about obligation than love, and a mind that was constantly racing, unsure of which direction to go. There was a time, just a couple of years before that, when I had big dreams. I thought the world was mine to conquer. I remember standing in front of the mirror, brushing my hair back, smiling at the person staring back at me. "I'm going to do big things," I'd whisper to myself. "I'm going to make a difference." It was a belief that came from deep within, the kind of optimism only youth can carry. But somehow, that belief got buried under disappointment, under the weight of unmet expectations. Slowly, over time, I forgot what it was like to believe in myself. I remember sitting in my apartment one night, after yet another exhausting day of trying, feeling like I was spinning in place. That night I was scrolling through social media, mindlessly comparing my life to the seemingly perfect lives of others. I felt small. I felt insignificant. I wanted to delete my accounts, hide away from the world, and forget everything. It felt like I was the only one who wasn't living up to the dream. Everyone else seemed to have figured it out while I was just existing. The past doesn't define me. My mistakes don't make me who I am. The shame I carried around for failing didn't own me. The truth is, the past is just a reflection of where you were, not who you are meant to be. We all have moments that haunt us. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've had times when you've messed up, big time, and the weight of it hangs over you like a shadow. Maybe you've made a decision that still echoes in your mind. I know I have. But here's the thing. You are not the mistakes you've made. You are not the wrong turn or the moment you should have spoken up but didn't. You are not the failure or the regret. You are not the disappointment or the misery. Okay? I'm not some mystical floating body. Those things don't define you. They are simply parts of your story, and they are not the ending. It took me years to learn that. I used to carry my mistakes like bricks, one on top of the other, thinking I needed to build a wall to protect myself. I thought I had to shield myself from the pain, but what I didn't realize was that those bricks were blocking me from seeing the bigger picture. They were keeping me from moving forward. One of the most painful experiences in my life was a relationship that fell apart. It wasn't just any breakup, it was a relationship I had poured myself into, believing it was everything I wanted and needed. When it ended, I didn't know who I was anymore. I was lost in the aftermath, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of what used to be my identity. I remember the night we broke up. We were sitting in my living room, a place that had once felt so full of warmth and love. But that night, it felt cold and empty. The words came out harsh and bitter, cutting through the silence like a knife. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about myself and my future came crashing down. For months, I spiraled. I was angry, I was sad, and I was confused. How could I have been so wrong? How could I have invested so much into something that turned out to be nothing? I carried that weight for months. Until one day, I looked at myself in the mirror again. But this time, instead of seeing the failure, the mistakes, the hurt, I saw something else. I saw the person I was becoming. Not the one who had gotten it all wrong, but the one who was learning. The one who was resilient enough to stand back up, dust off the pieces, and keep going. And that's when I realized the past isn't a prison. It's a mirror. It reflects who we were, yes, but it doesn't define who we are or who we will be. The past serves as a reminder of what we've overcome, not as a weight to keep us from moving forward. It's a reflection of where we've been, but it's not the destination. The destination is ahead of us, and it's up to us whether we keep looking back or step into the future. I want you to think about your own past. Think about those moments that make you cringe. Think about the times you've stumbled, the times you've felt defeated. Now, picture yourself standing before that mirror. What do you see? Do you see someone who has failed? Or do you see someone who is still standing, still breathing, still fighting? Someone who has lived through the storm and made it to the other side. I know this isn't easy. It's hard to shake the memories that haunt us. It's difficult to forgive ourselves for the things we wish we could undo. But here's the truth I want you to carry with you. Your past doesn't have to control your future. You have the power to change the narrative. I spent so many years running from my past, hoping that if I just ignored it, it would go away. But the truth is, it was only when I stopped running and started accepting those parts of me, the parts I was ashamed of, that I could truly move forward. The past didn't have the power to hold me anymore. I had the power to choose how it shaped me. There's a beauty in stepping back and reflecting on where we've been. But there's an even greater beauty in recognizing that we can choose how to use the lessons we've learned. We can choose to let our past be a foundation, not a burden. And so in 2025, I challenge you to step back. Look at your past, not with shame, but with understanding. Acknowledge it, learn from it, but don't let it define you. The person you were is just that, who you were. Who you are is so much more. The choices you make today can change the trajectory of your life, just as mine did. Let me tell you something about now. It's all we have. Right this minute, what we do with our time and our choices is the key to unlocking a future we could never have imagined. The concept of now, this fleeting, delicate moment that slips through our fingers if we're not careful, has been something I've struggled with for as long as I can remember. We're taught to look ahead, to always have our eyes on the future, chasing something that we think will fulfill us. But here's what I've come to learn. The future is nothing without the present. And the present, it's everything. I remember a time when I lived my life on autopilot. I was always looking for the next milestone, the next achievement, the next thing that would make me feel like I had my life together. Just get through this, I told myself. Once I've reached this goal, everything will be perfect. Once I get that promotion, once I buy that house, once I lose those 10 pounds, then I'll be happy. Sound familiar? But no matter how many things I achieved, I never felt like I'd arrived. I was always waiting for some mythical future moment where everything would fall into place. I didn't realize that while I was waiting for someday, I was missing today. The turning point came during one of the lowest moments of my life. It was the kind of moment that strips you down to your rawest, most vulnerable self. I had been working tirelessly at a job that drained me, living in a city that felt too big and too lonely, and spending my days distracted, hoping that something outside of me would change and make everything feel right. But nothing changed. And then one day I woke up with a sharp, burning sense of dissatisfaction that felt like it was consuming me from the inside out. It wasn't just a bad day. It was the realization that I had been living the wrong way for years. I had gotten so lost in chasing the next thing that I forgot to live in the moment. I forgot that life doesn't happen tomorrow, next week, or next year. It happens now. And if I didn't change how I was living in the present, I would spend the rest of my life chasing a future that would never quite fulfill me. I remember standing in front of my bathroom mirror that morning, staring at the reflection of someone I barely recognized. I felt like I was looking at a stranger, someone who was running on empty, just surviving, not truly living. I had been caught in a cycle of worry, anxiety, and fear, constantly telling myself that I couldn't be happy until I had everything figured out. I wanted to scream. Why haven't I figured this out by now? Why does it always feel like there's something more I need to do before I can feel peace? But instead, I did something different. I stopped. In that moment of stillness, I asked myself, what if right now, this moment is all I need to feel whole? What if I'm already enough, just as I am right now? And something inside me clicked. I realized that the answers I was looking for weren't out there somewhere in the future. They were in here, in the present moment. They were in the choices I made today, the thoughts I allowed to occupy my mind, and the way I chose to engage with life. I made a decision that day to stop waiting. I decided to stop thinking about the next thing, the next goal, the next piece of the puzzle, and to start living fully in the present. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. It's not easy to turn off the constant chatter of what's next. It's not easy to give up the illusion that the future holds all the answers. But once I made that decision, I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. The first thing I did was take a deep breath, just a simple breath. A slow, deep inhale that filled my lungs and then exhaled all the tension I had been holding onto for so long. As I stood there in my bathroom, I made a promise to myself that I would live in the present. I would stop chasing a future that was always just out of reach, and I would start living, really living right now. The change didn't happen overnight, of course, but gradually I started noticing the small, precious moments that I had been missing. The way the sunlight streamed through my window in the mornings, casting a soft glow over the room. The smell of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. The sound of my own laughter. The feeling of my feet on the ground. The soft embrace of a hug. These were the things that made life rich, that made it worth living. I started to realize how much time I had wasted living in my head instead of living in the moment. I began to appreciate the people in my life more deeply, to savor the conversations, the connections, the shared moments that had always been right in front of me. I started feeling more alive, more present, and more connected to everything around me. And then something amazing happened. Once I let go of the need to control the future started unfolding in ways I could never have planned. Opportunities began to arise, doors began to open, and I was ready to walk through them, not because I had planned for them, but because I had finally started showing up for my life, right here, right now. But there's a catch. Living in the present doesn't mean ignoring the future. It doesn't mean giving up on goals or dreams. It doesn't mean that we don't plan for the future or take action to create the life we want. What it means is that we stop living in the future before it happens and we start living in the now while we create it. Living in the present means embracing the moment, no matter what it holds. It means acknowledging that today is all we have and making the most of it. It means letting go of the illusion that tomorrow will bring us happiness and finding peace in the here and now. One of the most powerful things I learned during this shift was that the future, while important, is completely out of our control. All we can control is how we show up in this moment. And if we can embrace the present, if we can find peace in the now, we'll find that the future unfolds in ways we could never have imagined. I remember a conversation I had with a close friend of mine about a year after I made that change. We were sitting at a coffee shop sipping on our drinks, and she asked me how I had been able to turn things around. How had I gone from feeling lost and stuck to living with such purpose and joy? I thought about it for a moment, and then I said, I stopped waiting. I stopped waiting for the perfect moment and realized that there is no perfect moment. This moment right now is all we have. And if we don't show up for it, we're missing everything. Her eyes lit up and she said, "You're right. I've been so focused on getting to the next stage of my life that I've been missing the beauty of where I am right now." And that's the truth, isn't it? We're so focused on the future that we forget to live in the present. We forget that life isn't something we're waiting to start, it's something that's happening right now. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Stop waiting for the future. Stop thinking that someday you'll have it all figured out, that one day you'll wake up and everything will be perfect. The truth is, there is no perfect moment. There's only this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. The future will come, yes, but it will come when you fully embrace today. If you want to change your life, don't wait for tomorrow. Change it now. Live in the present. Find the beauty in the moment and watch how everything shifts. The power of now is in your hands. All you have to do is show up. Sometimes you need to step back before you can move forward. It's in those moments of pause, of reflection, where clarity emerges and the path ahead becomes brighter. There was a time in my life when moving forward felt like an endless sprint, one foot in front of the other, always pushing toward the next goal. For years, I lived under the assumption that progress was only achieved through relentless motion. I believed that the key to success was to keep running, to never stop for anything, not even for a breath. The faster I moved, the more I accomplished. And the more I accomplished, the emptier I felt. I had become a machine of productivity, always going, always striving, but never truly arriving. I would check off tasks one after another, always moving towards some distant destination that seemed just out of reach. No matter how much I achieved, I was never satisfied. I always thought the next milestone would be the one that made me feel whole. But in my pursuit of progress, I had overlooked something vitally important: the power of stepping back, connecting to the moment, connecting the value and the journey itself within your own. It wasn't until I faced a personal crisis that the universe forced me to stop. I had been working non-stop for years, chasing promotions, building relationships, striving to be successful in every sense of the word. But then, one day, life hit me with a powerful reminder that nothing lasts forever. I lost my job, a job I had poured every ounce of energy into, a career that I had believed defined me, and just like that, everything I thought was certain was gone. At first, I was paralyzed with fear. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath me, and for a brief moment, I didn't know who I was. All of my self-worth had been tied to that job, that role, that version of me. Suddenly, I was left standing in the ruins of my own identity. The person I thought I had become, the successful, determined, always moving forward person, was no longer there. I was forced to step back, whether I liked it or not. For weeks, I sat in the quiet aftermath, lost and confused. I tried to keep going as if nothing had happened, but I was drained. I had poured everything into a life that I now realized wasn't sustainable. It took a while, but eventually the panic subsided, and I began to see something I hadn't noticed before. The space that was left when everything I knew came crumbling down. It was uncomfortable, yes, but in that discomfort I started to discover something precious: the power of pausing, the power of stepping back. Stepping back isn't the same as giving up. It's not about retreating in defeat. It's about finding the clarity and perspective needed to move forward with intention. In the absence of the noise, I began to hear my own voice again. I began to reconnect with who I was beyond the labels and the expectations. And in that stillness, I discovered something I had forgotten: the art of reflection. I remember one specific evening when I decided to go for a walk. It was a quiet autumn evening, the golden light of the setting sun spilling through the trees as I wandered through the park. The world around me was alive with movement, but in my mind, everything was still. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the pressure to move forward. I didn't feel the urge to push, to force, to be anywhere but where I was. As I walked, I thought about everything I had done in the years leading up to that point. The choices I had made, the sacrifices I had made, the people I had left behind in the pursuit of success. And slowly, like a fog lifting, I began to see that much of my life had been spent chasing something external, something I thought I needed to make me feel fulfilled. But in reality, the most important things were always within me. Those days almost felt like a dream, a collage, a reprieve from fearful dynamics and the real bond with the individual. And they had been waiting for me to pause long enough to notice. I had been living with a constant sense of urgency, always striving for the next achievement, the next thing that would make me feel whole. But in that moment of stillness, I realized that I didn't need to keep rushing. I didn't need to keep moving forward at such a relentless pace. What I needed was to step back and give myself permission to breathe, to reflect, to feel. It was in that pause that I began to understand what stepping back truly meant. It wasn't about being stuck or stagnant. It was about giving myself space to gain perspective, to recharge, and to reconnect with my own inner wisdom. The key to moving forward wasn't always to push harder. It was to step back and see the bigger picture. Sometimes you need to take a step back to take 2 steps forward. And it's true. We get so caught up in the rush of life that we forget to look at the bigger picture. We forget to check in with ourselves, to see if the path we're on is truly aligned with who we are and where we want to go. Stepping back allows us to reassess, to course correct, and to make sure we're moving in the right direction. I remember another moment, a few months later, when I took a week-long trip to the mountains. It was just me, a journal, and the serenity of nature. The first few days were difficult as I tried to shake off the habits of constant productivity. I found myself wanting to check my phone or make a to-do list as if I were somehow wasting time by not doing anything. But slowly, as I sat by the campfire at night, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind rustle the trees, I realized something profound. I wasn't wasting time. I was reclaiming it. The time I spent in the mountains wasn't just about escape, it was about reconnecting with myself. Stepping back, taking a break, hitting pause, it's a form of self-care. It's a form of self-respect. We live in a world that demands constant action, constant productivity, but we can't pour from an empty cup. If we're always rushing forward without ever stopping to reflect, we risk losing touch with ourselves and with what truly matters. Sometimes we need to step back to heal, to listen, and to realign our intentions. 2. Stepping back doesn't mean you're falling behind. It doesn't mean you're weak or indecisive. In fact, stepping back can often give you the strength and clarity you need to take the next step with greater purpose and conviction. It's the act of pausing that allows you to assess, to decide with intention, and to move forward in a way that is more meaningful. One of the most important lessons I learned from this experience is that there is no shame in taking a step back. In fact, it's often the most courageous thing we can do. It's an act of wisdom and strength to know when to slow down, when to breathe, and when to listen. It's in those moments of pause that we find our true direction. Now, when I feel overwhelmed or uncertain, I don't rush to fill the silence with more tasks or distractions. Instead, I embrace the pause. I take a step back. I give myself permission to reflect, to recalibrate, and to reconnect with my purpose. It's amazing what happens when we stop pushing so hard. We start to hear our own voice again, and we start to understand that the next step forward doesn't have to be rushed. It can be taken with thoughtfulness, clarity, and a sense of peace. As I write this, I'm reminded of another story. A few years ago, I was working with a colleague on a huge project. We were both exhausted, trying to juggle multiple responsibilities. One day, we found ourselves stuck, unable to move forward because we were overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the task. We both decided to take a break. We walked out of the office, grabbed coffee, and when we returned, we had a newfound clarity. The task that had seemed impossible felt much more manageable, and we approached it with fresh eyes. That experience taught me that stepping back isn't just for personal growth, it's for productivity too. Sometimes, when we're stuck or overwhelmed, the best thing we can do is step away for a moment. The answers will come when we give ourselves space to breathe. If you're feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or uncertain about the next step, I encourage you to take a moment to step back. Give yourself permission to pause, to reflect, and to find the clarity you need. It's in the stillness that the path forward often becomes clearer.